Hey, this is Mr. Ford. I am doing the notes over the converse of the Pythagorean Theorem. That's 7.2. So our goal today is that I will understand the Pythagorean Theorem and how to use it. Or I should say the converse of the Pythagorean Theorem. So let's just get started here. So I'm going to say that if the square of the length of the longest side of a triangle is equal to the sum of the squares of the length of the other two sides, then the triangle is a right triangle. So I'm saying that if the square of the length of the longest side is equal to the sum of the squares of the other two sides, then the triangle is a right triangle. So the Pythagorean theorem is a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. What I'm telling you is that the converse is simply that the square of the longest side is equal to the sum of the two legs, both squared, summed together. So how do you think we would solve these? So are the following right triangles? So I say if c squared, if my hypotenuse squared, right, is squared, then that's equal to this squared plus this squared. So let's do it. So I have 3 times the square root of 34 is equal to 9 squared plus 15. Now I should say that this, let's make that look a little prettier. So it should be 3 the square root of 34 all squared. Now when doing this one here, we want to do 3 squared, which is 9, times the square root of 34, which is, well, square root of 34 squared, which is just times 34. So we have that there. Equals 9 squared plus 15 squared. So we have 81 plus 225. Now, when I do 9 times 34, I get 306. Now, whenever I do 225 plus 81, I also get 306. So I'm going to tell you that this checks out. So this is a right triangle. So let's draw a box there. So we're going to say, yes, that checks out. Now we're going to look at this one here. We're going to say that, let's say that this is our hypotenuse here. So if you look at this, this is going to look like a right angle here, meaning that this is going to be our hypotenuse. Plus, it's the longest side, and we know that our hypotenuse is our longest side. So if this is true, we're going to say that 26 squared is equal to 22 squared plus 14 squared. So when we do 26 squared, we get 26 times 26, which is 676, is equal to 22 times 22 plus 14, 22 times 22 plus 14 times 14, so that's 680. Now these do not equal each other, so we know that this is simply not a right triangle. So let's do the last one. So 25 is our longest side, so I know that's a hypotenuse. So I know that 25, that's fun, red. So I know that 25 squared is equal to 15 squared plus 20 squared, if this is in fact a right triangle. So 25 squared is 625, 15 squared is 225, and 20 squared is 400. So 625 is equal to, wow, would you look at that, 625. So we know that this, in fact, is true. Make sure it's the same color. Is true, so that is a right triangle. So we can go ahead and draw a right triangle in right there. And remember, we know that the hypotenuse is the longest side, so that's how I knew to draw it in this corner. So now this says, if the square of the length of the longest side of a triangle is less than the sum of the squares of the lengths of the other two sides, then the triangle is called an acute triangle. So again, if the hypotenuse c squared is less than a squared plus b squared, we know that it is called an acute triangle. Okay, and then moving on. If the square of the length of the longest side of a triangle is greater than the sum of the squares of the lengths of the other two sides, then the triangle is an obtuse triangle. So the hypotenuse squared is greater than both legs squared and summed together. So now this says, determine whether the numbers can represent the sides of the lengths of a triangle. Don't forget our inequality theorem. If they can, classify the triangle as acute, right, or obtuse. So first of all, we need to ask ourselves, is this a triangle? So I know it's a triangle if the two smallest sides added together is greater than the third side. So in this case, is 14 greater than 10? Absolutely. So we know that that is going to be a triangle. And we know that it is acute, obtuse, or right based on what happens when we add the sides. So let's add the sides squared here. So these are the legs. I misspoke. I meant legs. So we have 6 squared plus 8 squared is equal to 10 squared. So now I have 36 plus 64 is equal to 100. And we know by math that 100 is equal to 100, meaning that this is a right triangle. Okay, now what is the square root of 13? So we're on to the next one. So let's type in square root of 13. And we get we can call it 3.606. Okay? So I ask myself, is this a triangle? Is 3.606 plus 6 bigger than 7? And I know that's about 9 something. So I know that this is a triangle. Now, what do we get when we sum the two sides and set it equal to the square of the hypotenuse? So we do square root of 13 squared plus 6 squared is equal to 7 squared. So then I have 13 plus 36 is equal to 7 squared, which is just 49. So now 49 is equal to 49. So in this case, well, I guess I could just write right triangle. Okay, now on to the third one. So 67 squared, or the square root of 67, is going to end up being 8.18. So I asked myself, are the two smaller sides, 4 and 8.18, added together bigger than 9? And the answer is yes, of course. Now we need to figure out if it's acute, obtuse, or right. So I have 4 squared plus the square root of 67, squared equals 9 squared. So I have 16 plus 67 is equal to 9 squared, which is just 81. Now 16 plus 67 is going to end up being 83, but that does not equal 81, right? So that does not equal each other. But now I know that the sum of the two legs squared together individually and then summed together is going to be greater. Change that into a greater than 81. So what does that mean? That means we have an obtuse triangle. So now we have this triangle over here. So I asked myself, okay, 8 and 9 added together, is that bigger than 10? Of course it is. So we have 19 is bigger than 10, so we agree it's a triangle. Now I have 8 squared plus 9 squared is equal to 10 squared. So I have 81, well, that's over there, but plus 64 is equal to 100, which is not true. We know that 80 plus 60 is 140. We got working with 145 is bigger. I know that's not true. I know that's not true. It's bigger than 100. So again, we have an obtuse triangle. Okay, the final one here. This can be a little deceiving to know which one's your hypotenuse, but we know that this is not our hypotenuse because our hypotenuse is, in fact, the longest side. So I go back to the Pythagorean theorem or the converse, converse being c squared equals a squared plus b squared. And I say, okay, is 17 squared equal to 8 squared plus 15 squared? So is 17 squared, I don't have that memorized off the top of my head, but 17 times 17 is 289. Is that equal to 64 plus 225? 289. So I say this is in fact a right triangle. So then we would draw in our little box. Well, that's all I have for you today. Feel free to reach out if you have any other questions, and please see the notes if you have any other concerns or comments.